Section leader Elizabeth Shaw jumped out of the jeep and onto the crunchy gravel-strewn entrance to what had once been a mine shaft. It was night, but the immediate area was illuminated by arc lights set up by the small regiment of Republican security forces who had already secured the perimeter. It was a bitterly cold night, and not for the first time she wished the RSF uniforms were different for the two sexes. She buried the protest deep down, knowing where the slightest expression of nonconformity could lead to. She tried not to shiver and pretended her legs weren't freezing as she approached the platoon underleader. Hawkins snapped to attention. Shaw gestured him to stand at ease. "Situation?" she asked. The underleader replied. The party from the Bedford Scientific Labour Camp had been led into position. He pointed to the gaping hole in the side of the mountain around which the RSF were now dotted. "Ready for activation." "Already?" she whistled. "That's fast." Hawkins smiled a mirthless smile. "I found it easy to. Persuade them?" Again Shaw buried her distaste. "Yes," she eventually murmured. "I'm sure you did. Take me to them. Leave a detachment here by the entrance." With that order, Shaw, Hawkins and a few hand-picked men switched on the torchlights affixed to their helmets and proceeded down what had been the old mine shaft. Long ago, almost a lifetime away, in one of the sunlight-filled university science buildings, student Elizabeth Shaw paused by the door to her physics professor's office, tidied her long red hair past her shoulders, knocked and entered. "Come in." When Elizabeth entered the room, her tutor looked up from a vast pile of paperwork, yet she did so with a smile, indicating for the student to take a seat. But she remained standing, hovering uncertainly. "Ah, yes, Miss Shaw, I'm glad you dropped by. Your message did ask me to see you right away, miss." The professor laughed. "This isn't a protection camp, you know. At least not yet." "Oh, do sit down, Miss Shaw. You're tall enough as it is, even when we're at equal level." Elizabeth laughed as she finally sat down. It wasn't often that a tutor in such a position used this kind of down-to-earth humour, but even that sense of humour could be dangerous, and the uncertainty crept back in her belly. "I wanted to see you, Miss Shaw. May I call you Liz? Because, well, frankly, I don't quite know what to think. I was reading through your dissertation abstract here, the harnessing of electrical fields as an infinite power supply. You don't exactly think small, do you?" She could feel herself blushing. She'd known it was too ridiculous and far-fetched. It made her look like an overachiever. It made her look like... "And I must say it's absolutely brilliant work." "What?" She must have misheard her. "It's brilliant work. I'm really very impressed." "Oh." She was literally speechless and was too staggered to realise she must have looked somewhat comically open-mouthed. "It's the sort of paper that makes all this worthwhile." Elizabeth wasn't sure what she meant by all this, but kept listening anyway. "You'll need to really nail down your numbers, though. Now, it's possible that a student at your level could be granted a degree of research time in one of the major state laboratories. There's fascinating work being done in a related field." The professor tailed off. Elizabeth felt there was a book coming. "But..." She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, sighing deeply. "Liz, I won't lie to you. There's a great potential in you, but it's never been harder to ask anyone, especially someone like yourself, to commit to a future in scientific research." She laughed. "God, listen to me. I bet you can't tell if I'm trying to tempt you into specialising or actively trying to put you off." "Specialise? You mean, you think..." "Liz, entire postgraduate papers have been written on less than this. It's clear to me that in any normal and sane society you could be running this university department in a few years and would probably be the head of all top research in England within 10. Elizabeth didn't like the emphasis on normal and sane and was beginning to feel quite uncomfortable. "But we're not in a normal society. We're in this prison of rules and surveillance and bloody whatever you want to call it, thinking the right thing. And one of those thoughts, definitely not the right thing, is, as I am sure you'll very well know, that in the field of scientific research women are very much second place with men at the very top." I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Professor. Why, Petra Williams." Her tutor barked mirthlessly. "Ha! Petra Williams had one of the finest and most radical scientific minds of her generation. Why, not too long ago she was sitting in the very chair you're sat in now, practically bursting with ideas and ambitions. Despite what you may have read in the official press releases, do you know what she's been reduced to? Virtually a secretary to that man Stallman." She pronounced the name with evident distaste. She drags behind him with a little clipboard, occasionally telling him which precise buttons to press while he goes on and on endlessly about some drilling project of all things. Elizabeth was by now quite sure that not only should the professor not be saying these things, but that neither should she herself be listening to them. She got up and was about to stammer words to this effect when the professor made a gesture as if to say, "Relax, sit down, I'll stop now." When she sat back down, the older woman said slowly, "Really, I suppose what I've asked you here today to hear from me is that you have a choice. It's a tough choice, but it's yours to make, and there's no right or wrong answer. I'd love you to choose to stay here at the university and pursue a career in research, despite how difficult that would be. But if you decide to leave after your degree, maybe for one of the state or commercial concerns, well, of course, that'd be entirely up to you." It had been an uncomfortable talk, and as she left the building, Elizabeth didn't feel any less awkward. Her professor was only articulating thoughts and doubts she'd been having herself. As she turned the corner towards the bus stop, she stopped with a jolt. 2 hands immediately appeared from somewhere behind her and clasped themselves blindingly over her eyes. Underleader Hawkins proved to be refreshingly devoid of small talk as the group of RSF soldiers made their way through the shaft. They'd been walking for perhaps 15 minutes when light became visible from around a corner. Section Leader Shaw drew her service pistol from its holster. "Work Party Leader, step forward," she barked commandingly. From the light, which Shaw noticed unconsciously had a peculiar unnaturally blue radiance to it, a silhouette detached itself. As it came nearer, it coalesced into the figure of a woman, dressed in drab white overalls, now grey with dirt and oil and dust. The woman was tiny, and Hawkins' torchlight made the lenses of her glasses into 2 small opaque buttons. She looked tired, though that was none of Shaw's concern. "Progress," ordered the section leader. It was not a request. The woman's voice wasn't as tired or submissive as Shaw expected. "Harmonic resonance successfully achieved. The device is working perfectly." She looked up. "It's way ahead of current theory. I'd be interested to know where you got it." Shaw clicked her fingers. One of her men walked forward and brutally struck the woman on the side of the head with the butt of his rifle. She fell to the ground, but the same soldier then dragged her to her feet. "Not so cocksure now, are you?" thought Shaw with a vicious stab. It wouldn't do to have any of the volunteers get any funny ideas about their importance. They were all required here and now, but all of them ultimately were expendable. She remembered from her training that it was always well to remind them of this fact. "Now," resumed Shaw, "show us." The woman looked up, and for a moment her pain apparently subsided. She was looking at the section leader with a curious glint. "It's just here, the spear. Is just here." Turning the corner, the small party soon had to squint, for the source of the unnatural blue light was located just yards away. It was seemingly spherical, a large blue thing that, judging from the debris in the gaping hole in the rock above, had fallen to earth. Shaw would have taken it for a meteor if it wasn't for the fact it was glowing. Positioned in a circular formation around the sphere were a group of SLC workers, all of them in the same drab overalls, all of them aiming what looked like small radio microphone dishes towards the sphere. The technology had been cobbled together by a scientific expert whose existence was the most securely kept secret in the Republic. The small woman was quite correct in stating it was ahead of any current scientific reality. Her advisor had instructed the RSF only in its most basic rules of operation, virtually just how to switch them on and off. Harmonic contra-resonance was a theory to render immobile a volatile energy source, and there was a suspicion that this is what the sphere was. Hawkins broke the slightly uncomfortable silence. "It looks strange. What are those shapes?" Shaw and the small woman scientist approached the sphere to get a closer look. "Interesting," said the woman. "It's not actually spherical as such, it's an interlocking series of hexagons," broke the section leader. "It appears as if each individual hexagon is energizing its neighbours in some way." The small woman again looked at Shaw oddly. "Yes," she concurred slowly. "Perhaps even building a feedback loop of energy." Just as Shaw was about to order a soldier to give her another clout for such insolence, she stopped, for she too now had a moment of recognition. It was her old professor, the professor who had urged her to pursue a career in science at the university all those years ago. It was the older woman who reacted first. "Yes, I thought there was something familiar about you." Shaw uncharacteristically said nothing in reply. She stood back a little and partly pretended to be examining the sphere. She could feel the professor's gaze. "While you're pretending to keep your cool, I can tell you something definite about this object. You know what it is?" "I know what it isn't. It's definitely not a meteorite." Shaw looked at her. She was smiling, and for a second so too did Shaw. For a second she wasn't section leader Shaw anymore, but was back to being science student Liz sharing a wry joke with her professor. The millisecond of familiarity was broken by some of the workers, one of them almost squeaking with fright. One of the soldiers approached him, pointing his gun straight at him, but the man was too busy fiddling with the controls of his dish. "Sir," he wailed, "there's something destabilising the field." The professor joined his side, as did Shaw. The readings on his monitor were fluctuating. Shaw took the information in at a glance. "Power build-up." "From where, though?" asked her old tutor, clearly unflappable. "There's no external power input. None that we can see. Perhaps it draws its power from..." She stared at the sphere more closely. The very small gaps between each hexagon were throbbing with bluish-purplish light in rotation with the hexagons themselves. Suddenly looking at the shapes gave her a flash of insight. This isn't a hole, it's part of something. And the extra power boost is coming from... Shaw looked at her with a trickle of fear running down her spine. "Other somethings?" She retreated several paces and pistol drawn and commanded the others to do the same. Hawkins and his men formed a circle, but none of them knew where they were meant to be pointing their guns. A rumbling sound came from further down the tunnel, its source impossible to see in the blackness, and in any case a sound hard to pin down. It had a dull metallic quality, but also something organic. Hawkins broke away from the circle and shouted, "Stop, or we fire!" The sound came nearer. One of the scientists, a funny little man despite his haggard appearance, adjusted a monocle and switched on a small torchlight. He took a few steps as if sprinting forward to see what it was that his beam was illuminating. "Rubish, you fools, stay back!" shouted the professor. The man was unheeding. Hawkins let him step forward quite happily. There were some flashes of reflected light dazzling in the gloom. Hawkins caught the briefest glimpse of something very large and very mechanical before he decided to open fire. Soon the mine shaft was ringing with the sound of ammunition, echoing around the walls, flashes from the guns giving Shaw a stroboscopic look at what it was that had been recharging the sphere, things that perhaps come back to reclaim it. There were two of them that she could make out, about 8 or 9 feet tall, almost rectangular in shape but with jagged, crystalline forms that made them look like they'd been made of pure diamond. They had glassy pointed heads, and from the trunk projected 2 pincer-like arms. One of them boomed out. In one illuminating gun flash, Shaw saw one of the creatures reaching out, now extending its pincer arm as it changed shape. In the next gun flash, she saw Hawkins' head cleanly sliced from its shoulders. "Retreat!" she shouted. "Get back!" But everybody was already scattering. Liz tore the hands away from her eyes and whirled round to confront her attacker. She immediately exhaled with relief. "Oh, you!" She slapped him good-naturedly. Mark was creased up with laughter. "You jumped a mile," he said, far too amused by his simple prank. "You scared the wits out of me." "Why, did you think I was one of your little green men?" She kissed him, and they walked hand in hand down the street. Mark had been teasing her about her scientific endeavours for months now, even though she had to keep reminding him that whatever he thought her scientific field of study certainly was not little green men from other planets. But Mark was all action, activity, doing things. To him, the idea of standing in front of a chalkboard with an armful of textbooks was totally anathema. "So how did it go?" he asked. Liz shrugged. "Oh, it was fine. I didn't get the lecture I was half expecting. You know, the whole you have a duty to science bit. If anything, the prof seemed... Oh, I don't know how she seemed. It was a bit peculiar." "All your scientific types are peculiar." "Joking, joking." He stopped halfway down the street and indicated that he had a loan of his father's car that day. Liz was impressed. It was a wonderful old-fashioned looking Bentley from the 1930s, and just standing next to it made her feel like a character from a classic novel. She couldn't resist a giggle as she got into the passenger seat. "No show for today, then?" "No, thank God. I was able to convince father to give him the day off. He said to have fun and give his regards to my lady friend." He grinned. "So where would my lady friend like to go this afternoon?" "Your lady friend would like to go somewhere, anywhere where she doesn't have to think about science and the university and graduation, or any of those frankly vexing subjects." He kissed her and said, "Your wish is my command." After a long drive, they stopped for a meal in a little roadside pub. It was still light and they strolled into the beer garden afterwards, Mark draping one arm around Liz. She could feel that the conversation would turn eventually to what she thought of as the plans conversation. Ostensibly, these would be about what they would do next after summer, as with Liz being asked to stay on as a postgraduate. But the subtext of the conversations, always short and hesitant, exploratory things, was where are we going as a couple? So it was quite a surprise when Mark started the plans conversation, not with a what if or a what do you think, but a clear decision and a very definite I am. "I'm enrolling in the officers' programme," he stated fairly bluntly. "Oh." It was all Liz could say. It wasn't a terrific surprise. It was something he'd mentioned in the recent past, but it was a surprise the way he said it. Father says it's virtually a formality. Applying, I mean. It's more or less a done thing if I pass my finals, and even if I don't, well, he chuckled. The officers' programme, repeated Liz a little numbly. Mark seemed not to hear and continued talking. Things are really going to be different now that Party's taken control of the General Police on top of everything else. There are going to be plenty of openings for top posts all over. In fact, and it was only now that Liz detected the shift in tone, the half-joking "this is what I really want to ask you" thing. I hear the RSF is going to be branching out into science too. They reckon the coming of age is going to be technologically based. All computers and far-out modes of energy, things like that. In fact, I was wondering if maybe we could both enrol in the officers' programme, together. Liz didn't say something for long enough for Mark to get uncomfortable. Eventually she winced, as if thinking about it was painful to her. And it's been such a pleasant afternoon, she eventually said. Have I ruined things? Mark looked sullen and boyish. I'm sorry. Here's me meant to be whisking you away from it all, and I bring it all up here with us. It's not that, she said, although already she was slinging her bag around her shoulders in a clear indication they were now leaving. It's just, I know I've got a decision to make, one way or the other, but, well, I don't want to, just yet. She sighed with the futility of even saying it out loud. I just want to make sure that whatever choice I make, it's the right choice. You do understand? He smiled glumly and said that he did. Behind the section leader, her small battalion were opening fire with a fury that could only be indiscriminate. She knew that in their panic they were probably firing blindly. The sounds of gunfire mingled with peculiar alien sounds, but they were aliens she knew in her heart of hearts, despite all the training and the party's official scientific corpse line on the non-existence of extraterrestrial life. They were not earthborn sounds. They were not earthborn beings. She stopped finally after running for some minutes further into the mine. It was only then that she realised she'd been holding someone's hand. It was the professor. With irritation she shook her off. The professor began panting, trying to catch her breath. Shaw remembered her training and took the pause to check and reload her pistol, breathing slowly and steadily. It would not do to appear exhausted in front of a civilian. Those things, panted the professor. Must have come from there. What was the word? Dynatrope, completed Shaw. She snapped her magazine into her pistol. The gunfire in the distance was becoming less frequent. Hawkins was a fool. She trained her pistol square on the professor. Did you know those beings were nearby? Had you considered the likelihood of them returning here? What? No! The professor raised her hands in shock. She lowered the gun. The underleader should have insisted you explore the immediate environs more closely. Well, he's not around now to regret it. But you, Professor, will have to explain yourself fully if you survive this. Don't you mean if we survive this? Joel considered giving her a slap for her blatant impertinence, but now was really not the time. The original mission had been to ascertain the full power or nature of the Dynatrope sphere, and if possible take it into RSF possession. The possibility of the Dynatrope's owners also showing up apparently had not been mentioned. If some of those crackpot slaves from the scientific labour camp had deliberately withheld any such intimation, the survivors would pay. Presently, however, Section Leader Shaw had a more pressing challenge: survival. Come with me, said Shaw, heading for a tunnel leading off to the right. This should take us round and back to our original point. We're going back there, to those things. The professor sighed. Well, I suppose it's better than slaving away in a camp. There was an edge to those words which Shaw chose again to ignore for the moment. Your impudence won't help matters. Those creatures are clearly a part of the sphere in some way. If we can effect some alteration in the resonance pattern, it may be possible to stop them. Exceptionally good thinking, replied a former mentor, in a voice that clearly had a ring of, I wondered if you'd noticed about it. You may have gone over to the RSF, but you're still clearly a scientist. The tunnel was dark, and Shaw's torch was not an especially powerful one. It was possible that the energy was somehow being drained in the locality of the alien sphere, so their progress was slow. I apply knowledge in the carrying out of my duties, parroted Shaw. Theoretical knowledge, parried the professor. Rather outside the cold clinical facts of party dictation, wouldn't you say? Your university was little more than a nest of subversives. Leaving all that behind was the best thing I could have possibly done. A cruel smile twitched at her lips. We in the RSF accomplished more scientific advancement in a year than your pitiful ivory tower did in decades. Yes, with slave labour, with stolen technology. Shaw rounded on her. What do you know about that? The professor smiled weakly. Giving yourself away there just a bit. Shaw menaced her with a pistol. "Oh, look what's happened to you," sighed the old woman sadly. "You could have been so inspiring." "Silence!" Shaw beckoned her to be very careful as she turned the corner. The blue glow clearly indicated they were now back at the original point. Peering round, Shaw saw the sphere surrounded by harmonic projector dishes as before, and a litter of dead bodies, slaves and soldiers alike on the ground. The two creatures were stood immobile, their crystal heads bowed so they pressed against the surface of the sphere. Their bodies shimmered and pulsed with the same blue light, completely in time with it. An energy source, confirmed Shaw in her mind, capable of splitting into separate components yet part of the same entity. But how easy would it be to incapacitate the two creatures, cut them off from the sphere's life-giving energy? She soon had a chance to find out. The sphere stopped its glowing and buzzing, and the two creatures disconnected themselves from it for a few moments and moved slightly apart from each other. To the section leader's surprise, their forms then shifted, the crystal segments that made up their bodies changing in size and arrangement so that, just a few seconds later, in the place of two hulking monstrosities now sat two odd and jagged lumps of silicon, like curious rocks carelessly dropped onto the ground, giving off a curious steam. Shaw took a chance. She sprang out towards the nearest resonance dish and commanded the professor to do the same. Swiftly checking the controls, she ensured the dish was set to the frequency that had first stabilised the erratic energy pulses from the sphere when it had been originally located. This time, however, she directed the dish not towards the sphere, but to the two rocks. "Now!" she shouted. The two crystalline lumps began to stir, and for the briefest of milliseconds Shaw could see that they were again changing shape, with little spears of crystal beginning to barb outwards. But the creatures had been caught unawares. The harmonic resonance field beamed at them from two dishes, immediately trapped them, and with what might have been a defeated sigh or groan, the two lumps stilled once more. Two women stood there for some time, tired, exhausted, the faint but steady hum of the sphere and the two rocks providing a slightly unreal air to the scene. The professor looked round, and eventually took in the situation. Her fellow slaves, some fine men and women amongst them, even friends and people she'd known from the days before scientist was almost a forbidden word, lay dead, their corpses strewn amongst those of the soldiers. "Dead," she suddenly sobbed. "And for what?" Shaw shook off some dust and grime from her uniform, as if symbolically reasserting her control and authority over the situation. She gazed at the older woman with a well-practised contempt. "For the continued safety and prosperity of the Republic," she said coldly. "Well," for a moment I almost thought. "What?" sneered the officer. "That seeing you might change my mind? That doing some calculations, doing some mathematics might draw me back to the world of science and learning? That these aliens might open up my mind to the wonders of the universe? You're pathetic. This mission has been one purpose and one purpose only. No wonder you ended up in labour camp. Now," she gestured with her pistol, "move." But the professor refused, and instead stepped closer and closer to Shaw, her face getting right up close. "What happened to you, Liz?" she cried in bewildered frustration. There was a loud gunshot. The professor staggered back and fell to the ground. She was quite dead. Shaw holstered her pistol. "I made a choice," she said, and then she began the walk back to the entrance of the mine. When she emerged from the mine shaft, more RSF soldiers were waiting, the area floodlit. She ignored the salutes from the platoon underleaders and carried on walking towards the large jeep with the RSF emblem on its side. The passenger door opened, and from it stepped down a tall, commanding, uniformed figure. He would have been considered handsome if not for the cruel sneer that seemed to constantly play on his mouth, and for the black patch that covered his left eye. "A success?" asked the brigade leader. From his tone it was clear that he expected an answer in the affirmative. Section Leader Shaw felt the familiar burn of pride as she reported back. "Yes, brigade leader. Artifact successfully stabilised." "Good," he said. He beckoned to a soldier garbed in a yellow plastic coverall, who then opened the back of a van, from which emerged a small battalion of similarly clothed men and women. "The science division will take care of things now. What of your complement of men?" "All dead, sir." "Dead?" The brigade leader paused for the merest moment. "Unfortunate. Hawkins was a good man. He will need to be replaced. Perhaps Benton will prove more resilient in the post. And your volunteers from the camp?" "Also dead, sir." A waste of labour, but such eventualities cannot be helped. Liaise with the science division. See if you can round up some more to replace them." She snapped her heels together and saluted. The brigade leader returned to his jeep and drove off. Section leader Elizabeth Shaw then moved to her underlings in the yellow coveralls. There was no time for reflection. She had a job to do.